guys, today I'm sharing my latest dresser makeover, this raw wood farmhouse beauty. Last week's video was all about removing the veneer, but this week I get to show you how it all turned out. Let's get to it. If you're new here, I'm Natalie Dayton with A Ray of Sunlight, and I fix up and sell old furniture, and I show you how you can do the same. Hit that subscribe button to join the fun. This is the dresser we're working on today. The previous owner had removed most of the damaged veneer, but there was still some veneer that needed to be removed. When I got this dresser, all I could think about is turning it into a raw wood farmhouse style dresser. So first, I started working on the veneer that needed to be removed. While I waited for the magic to happen up on top, I got to work sanding the rest of the dresser. This old antique dresser sanded down pretty fast since the old finish was dry and pretty thin. I started sanding it with 100 grit sandpaper just to get most of the finish off as fast as possible. I used my favorite little Surf Prep sander, but you could sand with any old sander for the most part. I just love the Surf Prep because of the foam sandpaper that I can use with it, and because it's rectangle, so I can get right up to the edges and into the corners with no problem at all. If you're using an orbital sander, you'll need to hand sand the corners and the edges. After everything was sanded with 100 grit sandpaper, I moved on to 150 grit sandpaper and then to 220 grit sandpaper. I used 150 grit instead of jumping straight to 220 grit sandpaper just to help avoid any sanding marks that come from using a power sander. I also tried to sand slower and not apply as much pressure to the sander to help avoid those sanding swirls. For the details at the bottom, I just folded a piece of sandpaper in half and sanded them by hand. I sanded off some of that dark stain in the details, but I left most of it just to show off those pretty details. Then I moved back to the veneer. It was pretty stuck on there except for in a few places, but with a few tricks I was able to remove it in really large pieces without using a bunch of elbow grease. I'll link to my video on the easiest way to remove veneer up in the card and in the description below. After the veneer was gone, I sanded the top smooth with 220 grit sandpaper and removed all of the dust from the dresser with a vacuum and a tack cloth. I wanted a raw wood look for this dresser, basically exactly how it looked like after I was done sanding. But I also wanted to make sure that that wood had a nice durable finish on it. When you add a coat of poly or any type of sealer, the wood deepens at least just a little bit, which is a real bummer because that raw wood is gorgeous. But there's a little bit of a workaround to make it look like raw wood again. The trick to making it lighter is to put a coat of whitewash on it. But first, I wiped a coat of poly all over the raw wood to keep the whitewash from soaking into the wood too much. Look at how much darker the wood got from just one coat of poly on it. Since the one coat of poly is so thin, it only acts as a barrier to keep the whitewash from soaking into the wood too much, and making it so then I can't wipe the whitewash back off. And since the whitewash is such a thin coat, it has no problem adhering to the one coat of poly over the raw wood. So basically, the poly gives you more control over the whitewash, and the whitewash lightens up the sealed wood. I love the painting sponge from Country Chic Paint to apply poly by hand, but the ones that I have on hand have been used and abused. So I picked this sponge up at my local hardware store, and I'm pretty impressed with the results. For some reason, the wood on the top drawer and the top of the dresser was different than the rest of the dresser. The rest of the dresser was more of an orange color. First, I used my homemade water-based stain that I love to use. It's just a little bit of brown latex paint mixed with a bunch of water, and it basically creates a stain. But that brown was just too brown and it had no orange in it. It was definitely not a close match. But since it was an orange tinted wood, I felt like I needed to do some sort of like orange stain right there. So I mixed a red paint and a yellow paint, and then I mixed that up with water to kind of create a little stain or like an orange wash. And then I wiped that over the light wood. And I'm not gonna lie, when it was dry, I was pretty impressed with how close of a match it was. After it was dry, I put a coat of poly over that whitewash stain stuff just to seal it in and make sure the whole entire dresser had a nice coat of poly on it. After that coat of poly was dry, then I watered down some white chalk paint that I had on hand. Any water-based white paint will work as whitewash. Basically, to make whitewash, you just take white paint and water it down with a bunch of water. As you can see, I don't really measure the water to paint ratio. I just kind of want it to look like water that is tinted white. Then I got a little bit of the whitewash onto a lint-free rag and I wiped it on, staying with the direction of the grain. I worked in really small sections, so it didn't have time to dry or soak into the wood too much. After I wiped it on, I basically wanted to wipe it right back off, just to make it a nice, thin, even layer of whitewash all over. I put on 3 more coats of poly. Each coat of poly dried in only 15 minutes or so it went really fast. I used a satin poly for the first couple of coats, and then the last coat I used the matte poly to decrease the shine. I love the extra durability that the satin poly provides, but for this dresser I really wanted a flat or a matte finish just because it's raw wood. Raw wood shouldn't have a shine to it. To finish it up, I added these cute little dark knobs just as a contrast to the light raw wood. And I thought it accented that dark stain left in those details pretty well. That's it. Thanks for watching. If you thought this video was helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button and hit that bell notification so you'll be notified when we have more helpful videos on painting and repairing furniture.